Chapter 1. The Silent Collapse, the Plague of Justinian. There are moments in history when being born as a human feels like a cruel roll of the dice. In the mid-6th century, across the lands ruled from Constantinople, new life often meant stepping into a world already shadowed by death. The first great pandemic in recorded human history arrived with a stealth that made it all the more terrifying. It became known as the Plague of Justinian, a catastrophe that would take millions, shutter cities, and unmake institutions that people had trusted for generations. At first, the streets grew quiet. Bells tolled with grim regularity. Markets thinned, and traders left ships unmanned. Even Emperor Justinian found his court haunted by loss. Yet the real terror could not be seen. A microscopic bacterium transmitted by fleas riding on rats, carried across the sea by a single ship, began a chain reaction. This invisible predator would sweep through towns and countrysides, altering the fate of peoples and the course of empires. Stay with me, because soon I will reveal how the plague tore apart economies, upended military plans, and left societal scars that lasted centuries. If you want to explore the darkest, most decisive moments of history with clear, source storytelling, subscribe now. Don't miss the next chapter. The Plague of Justinian first appeared in 541 CE in Pelusium, an Egyptian port city. From there it spread along the arteries of trade. Ships carried not only goods but disease, bringing the infection to Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, and ports across the Mediterranean. Contemporary reports and modern estimates suggest the initial wave may have killed between 25 and 50 million people, a catastrophic toll in a world whose total population was far smaller than today. Entire neighborhoods were abandoned as families vanished overnight. Granaries lay untended, and supply chains broke down. Byzantine historians recorded harrowing scenes: bodies heaped in streets, mass graves dug beyond the capacity of local cemeteries, and civic systems strained almost to breaking. The imperial administration struggled to keep tax revenue flowing even as production collapsed. The plague did not end with a single summer. It returned in repeated waves for 2 centuries, each recurrence eroding the social fabric further. Military campaigns faltered as armies suffered attrition not only from enemies but from disease. Defensive borders thinned and political authority weakened. In some regions, populations fell dramatically, altering labor supply and economic relations in ways that historians argue influenced the slow transformations of medieval Europe and the Mediterranean. For an ordinary newborn at that time, survival was far from certain. Infant mortality rose where disease, famine, and social disorder intersected. Parents faced impossible choices, and communities that had once provided support became fragmented or disappeared. Where death was common, cultural practices changed, legal expectations shifted, and religious life became suffused with grief and urgency. The memory of loss would ripple across generations. By the end of the first Great Wave, the Mediterranean world had been profoundly altered. Cities that had flourished for centuries faced decline. Economies that depended on steady trade were forced to adapt or collapse. The political and military ambitions of rulers were curtailed by a reality in which people and resources had suddenly become scarce. The Plague of Justinian stands as a stark reminder that human institutions, however powerful, remain vulnerable to nature's smallest agents. In certain moments of history, simply being born was itself the first gamble of life, and for many, that gamble ended in tragedy. The psychological and cultural impact of the plague endured long after bodies were buried. Communal rituals adapted as societies coped with persistent grief. Artistic expressions and sermons reflected a world newly aware of fragility. Property relations shifted as heirs died and land changed hands. Labor shortages gave surviving workers leverage in some regions, slowly transforming economies and social expectations. Monasteries and churches swelled with the bereaved seeking solace, but they too were strained by loss. Across the Mediterranean and into Europe, the Plague of Justinian left patterns of depopulation, economic stress, and political realignment that historians still trace when they study the transition from late antiquity into the medieval era. Chapter 2: Europe in Shadows, the Black Death. The 14th century brought a horror that would eclipse nearly every calamity before it: the Black Death. Europe, a continent already struggling with famine, war, and social unrest, faced a catastrophe so devastating that simply being born in this era was a perilous gamble. The plague arrived silently, carried along trade routes from the bustling ports of the Mediterranean to the heart of Europe, leaving a trail of despair and death. Imagine cities emptied overnight. Streets once filled with merchants, children, and farmers suddenly fell silent, save for the tolling of bells and the distant cries of the sick. The Black Death was a predator without face or form, striking indiscriminately. Kings, peasants, and priests alike fell victim to its invisible grasp. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes you will witness not only the scale of death, but also the profound social upheaval it caused. And if you want to explore the darkest corners of human history, subscribe now. Be the first to learn the full story of humanity's struggle against this relentless killer. The Black Death arrived in Europe around 1347, carried by merchant ships docking in Sicilian ports. From there, it spread rapidly through Italy, France, Spain, and eventually Northern Europe. Historians estimate that between 75 and 200 million people perished over the following years, wiping out roughly 1/3 of Europe's population. Entire villages were abandoned, fields lay untended, and the usual rhythms of society were shattered. Trade collapsed, armies diminished, and governments struggled to maintain authority over terrified and dying populations. The disease was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, carried primarily by fleas living on rats. Yet understanding the cause offered little comfort to those facing its deadly consequences. Contemporary chronicles describe horrifying scenes: people collapsing in the streets, neighbors avoiding one another, and mass graves being dug as cemeteries overflowed. Communities turned inward, and suspicion and superstition ran rampant, with some blaming outsiders or minorities for the plague, leading to persecution and further tragedy. Medical knowledge at the time was limited. Physicians could do little more than prescribe prayers, herbal remedies, or quarantine measures that often proved ineffective. Fear, despair, and confusion gripped every stratum of society. Cultural, religious, and economic systems were profoundly disrupted. Families were torn apart, inheritance lines vanished, and labor shortages created shifts in social dynamics as survivors gained leverage in some regions, slowly reshaping Europe's economy. By the end of the initial waves of the Black Death, Europe had been transformed irrevocably. Cities rebuilt themselves over decades, trade networks adapted to new realities, and governments enacted policies to cope with recurring outbreaks. Religious life intensified, but so did skepticism and challenge to authority. For those born during these years, life was a precarious balance between survival and exposure to a relentless, unseen threat. The Black Death remains one of history's starkest reminders of human vulnerability. In a time of plague, famine, and fear, simply being born could be the first and most dangerous gamble of all. Yet, the resilience of survivors also set the stage for profound social, economic, and cultural changes that would shape Europe for centuries to come. Chapter 3: The Collapse of Societies, Famine, and War. After the waves of plague, humanity still faced relentless trials. Even beyond disease, famine and war were constant threats. In the 14th and 15th centuries, Europe and the Mediterranean were caught in cycles of poor harvests, climatic shifts, and political upheaval. Being born during these decades often meant facing starvation, forced migration, or conscription into endless conflicts. Survival was a precarious, daily gamble, and the odds were stacked heavily against the average human. Imagine entire regions where food shortages led to desperation, where parents could not feed their children, and where armies swept through villages, leaving devastation in their wake. Stay with me, because in the next moments you will see how famine and war combined to create a perfect storm of human suffering. And if you want to uncover the most intense challenges our ancestors endured, subscribe now. Don't miss any of this historical journey. One of the most devastating famines occurred during the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. A combination of unusually cold, wet weather and crop failures across northern Europe led to widespread hunger. Grain rotted in fields, livestock perished, and the price of food skyrocketed. Contemporary accounts describe people resorting to eating whatever they could find. Even in some extreme cases, reports of cannibalism emerge. Families that had survived generations of stability suddenly faced starvation as an everyday reality. Wars compounded these crises. The Hundred Years' War between England and France, 1337 to 1453, brought destruction to vast swaths of land. Armies ravaged fields, looted towns, and disrupted local economies. Peasants were forced into military service or displaced from their homes. In these turbulent times, being born into a peasant family meant facing near immediate exposure to violence, hunger, and social instability. The intersection of famine and war dramatically reduced life expectancy and left deep psychological scars on survivors. Beyond the immediate human toll, famine and conflict reshaped societies. Population declines forced labor shortages, giving some surviving peasants more bargaining power, while entire towns disappeared. Trade networks became unreliable, and governance systems struggled to maintain order. The church and religious institutions attempted to provide relief, yet their resources were often insufficient to meet the overwhelming need. Fear, despair, and uncertainty became the defining realities of daily life. In addition to physical suffering, these periods influenced cultural and intellectual life. Literature, chronicles, and art reflected the fragility of existence, while legal and economic practices adapted to the constant threat of scarcity and violence. Some rulers implemented reforms to stabilize regions, while others fell victim to the chaos, further perpetuating cycles of instability. Entire regions experienced repeated waves of hardship, ensuring that being born at this time was more than a simple chance. It was a continuous test of endurance and human resilience. By the end of these decades, Europe had been profoundly transformed. While millions had perished, survivors developed new strategies for coping with scarcity and conflict. Communities that endured learned resilience, adapted agriculture and trade, and prepared for the next challenge. The combined forces of famine and war illustrated a stark reality. In some eras, the mere fact of being born was itself a survival trial, requiring courage, adaptability, and sometimes sheer luck. Humanity's story in these centuries is a testament to both vulnerability and resilience. The legacies of famine and war endured long after the immediate crises ended. Societies restructured, populations slowly rebounded, and lessons learned during these times shaped political, economic, and cultural evolution. Communities rebuilt stronger social networks and implemented safeguards against future crises. Yet the memory of mass suffering lingered, influencing literature, oral histories, and collective consciousness. The period stands as a sobering reminder that in certain times and places, simply being born meant confronting forces beyond one's control, and surviving meant more than luck. It demanded endurance, adaptation, and the will to live. Chapter 4: The Age of Volcanic Winters, Natural Disasters, and Human Vulnerability. After centuries of plagues, famine, and war, humanity faced another kind of peril: nature itself. The 17th and 18th centuries brought what historians now call the volcanic winters. Massive volcanic eruptions around the globe ejected ash and gases into the atmosphere, dimming the sun and causing significant drops in temperature. For those born during these decades, life was often a battle against not only human threats, but also environmental catastrophes. Crops failed, winters lasted longer, and survival became increasingly uncertain. Imagine a world where summer sun barely warmed the soil, where entire harvests failed, and where food became scarce for millions. Natural disasters struck without warning, sparing no one. Stay with me, because in this chapter you will discover how volcanic activity reshaped societies, triggered famines, and forced human populations to confront their fragility. If you want to explore history's most relentless natural threats, subscribe now. Don't miss a single episode of this historical journey. One of the most notable events occurred in 1783 with the eruption of the Loki volcano in Iceland. This massive eruption released toxic gases and ash clouds that drifted across Europe, lowering temperatures and causing widespread crop failures. Contemporary reports describe thousands of deaths in Iceland from famine and respiratory illness, while European nations faced food shortages, soaring grain prices, and social unrest. Ordinary people, especially infants and children, were at greatest risk as malnutrition and disease spread quickly. Volcanic winters were not isolated to Laki. The eruption of Tambora in 1815, slightly beyond this period, produced the year without a summer, which caused global temperatures to drop dramatically. Crops failed across Europe, North America, and parts of Asia, leading to widespread famine and displacement. These climatic shocks compounded existing social and economic stresses, amplifying mortality rates. Being born in these years often meant entering a world where survival depended on luck, resourcefulness, and the resilience of one's community. The impacts went beyond immediate mortality. Economic structures were disrupted as food scarcity destabilized trade and local markets. Political authorities struggled to maintain order amid rising prices and mass suffering. Cultural and religious life reflected anxiety and fear, with many interpreting the disasters as divine punishment. Communities adapted by rationing food, migrating to more fertile regions, or reorganizing agricultural practices to cope with environmental volatility. Even when the worst eruptions subsided, the scars remained. Families lost generations, economies struggled to recover, and social hierarchies were altered as some communities collapsed while others survived. Infants born in these decades faced a hazardous start to life, where malnutrition, disease, and social instability were ever-present threats. Survival required more than parental care. It demanded adaptability, endurance, and sometimes sheer chance. By the end of this era, humanity had learned important lessons about vulnerability, adaptation, and the power of nature. Populations rebounded slowly, agricultural innovation spread, and governments began paying closer attention to environmental risks. The volcanic winters stand as a vivid reminder that in history, being born was often a roll of the dice, one where survival depended on courage, resilience, and the fragile interplay between humans and the natural world. The memory of volcanic winters persisted through literature, folklore, and historical records. Societies that survived developed early warning strategies, improved crop storage, and diversified agricultural practices. Economies and governance structures gradually adapted to cope with environmental unpredictability. For those studying history, these centuries illustrate a universal truth. Being born in certain eras meant confronting forces far beyond human control, and survival was not merely a matter of luck, but of resilience, knowledge, and adaptability.